Did the human being evolve, or was he a new creation? There can be no contradictions in the spiritual knowledge you receive from me myself, which my spirit has imparted to you who are of service to me and who have the task to pass on the pure truth from me to your fellow human beings, to spread my word which should enlighten you. Because I want to shed light onto the spiritual darkness in which people live, and especially when you desire an explanation yourselves. It took an infinitely long time for the creation work Earth to become what it is now, a creation which should enable people to achieve final perfection. And during this infinitely long time the original spirits, having been dissolved into the tiniest of particles, passed through countless works of creation in order to evolve evermore. The solidified spiritual substance gradually became alive, as you have been told several times already. It covered the infinitely long way in a state of compulsion, i.e. all creations fulfilled the purpose and task given to them by me, no constrained being could make its own decisions but gradually matured. Forms were created for spiritual substances of all degrees of maturity aspiring to ascend. The forms of the mineral, plant and animal world were infinitely diverse, and they all were brought to life by the minute particles of the fallen original spirits, which progressively united and finally became smaller and larger living organisms. On leaving their forms they united again and finally were embodied into forms which already rather resembled the shape of a human being. The whole lengthy course of development was subject to my law. In other words, all events in this creation which emerged through my will took place in accordance with natural law. As a result of their fall into the abyss, the original spirits had lost their self-awareness. However, one day they should regain this self-awareness again and embody themselves in the last form as a human being, in order to then bring the path of higher development to a close. The final forms in the compulsive state therefore became increasingly more human-like, but they had no self-awareness as yet. They acted instinctively in accordance with my will, although they already performed functions which resembled those of a human being. However, they were unable to think, they lacked reason and free will and were therefore not accountable. They were impelled into action by spiritual intelligences, just like every spiritual being still constrained within the form was subject to supervisors, who likewise transferred my will onto the constrained spiritual being through natural law. And then came the time when free will could be returned to the matured original spirits, by which they then should be tested as to whether they wanted to return to me or remain with my adversary. And for those original spirits I created the form of the human being. All works of creation, especially the ever larger created living beings, originated through my will, inasmuch as my thoughts took shape. And for this reason, these living beings were represented in the most varied forms, yet every form was different. There were the most diverse species bearing no resemblance to each other, which continued to reproduce themselves but always remained the same creatures. When the first original spirits had attained a level of maturity which required the form of the human being, my will once again brought forth a work of creation which was truly a work of wonder in the whole of my creation. This being was structured incredibly intricately. It was created in accordance with my will so that it could fulfill its earthly task, a being which I created, but which did not evolve from the already existing human-like creations. Because it was intended for this form to shelter an original spirit, a being which was once externalized by me in my image, and which was to become what it used to be once again. And therefore it had to be equipped with intelligence, free will and self-awareness, and these did not gradually evolve in the animal-like beings but they were given to the human form when the original spirit took possession of the first form, and they will always be given to every human being as part of his soul when, as divine breath, it gives life to the human being at birth. Afterwards people indeed reproduce themselves again in accordance with my law of nature, but they will always remain the same living creations as the first human being, Adam, was. They will not change into other living creations, but any change will always purely be an act of the soul which at first can still be disinclined towards me and during its time as a human being achieve highest perfection. The human body, however, will remain as I created it when Adam's soul took possession of it. Although the act of creating earth with everything in, on and above it, with all dead and living creations, certainly required an infinitely long time, but at the same time a phase of higher development had come to an end for the fallen spiritual essence when the minute particles of an original spirit had gathered again and the last process of return to me began. And this existence on earth as a human being also required a new work of creation by me, a form which could do justice to all demands in order to take the last test of its own free will. And thus, the human being can consider himself a special creation by me, because he is the only being on earth with the gift of intelligence, reason and free will, the marks of divine origin. He is therefore also able to recognize above himself a God and Creator who gave him life, and therefore he can also achieve final perfection on this earth if his free will genuinely strives for it. Amen.